You're listening to the Stein Seed Cast. Here's your host, David Thompson.
Hello, and welcome to the Stein Seed Cast. I'm your host, David Thompson, National Marketing and Sales Director for Stein Seed Company. We have another great episode lined up with special guests, expert insights, and discussion on everything you need to know about maximizing yield potential. On today's episode, we welcome longtime customer and production seed grower for Stein, Ray Gaesser. Ray and his family have been working in the land in southwest Iowa for more than 50 years, raising corn and soybeans. His priority is improving production while caring for the land through various conservation practices, including no-till and cover crops. Welcome, Ray.
Hey, welcome. Glad to have you here today.
So Ray has advocated on the local level, nationally, and even globally for agriculture as president and leader of the Iowa Soybean Association, American Soybean Association, the North American Climate Smart Agriculture Alliance, and many other boards and organizations. Ray will talk to us about his valued partnership with Stein Seed Company and his passion for agricultural advocacy. So let's get started. Well, Ray, we're here at your farm today. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your operation.
So our farm, Elaine and I were married 45 years ago. We began farming right here in southwest Iowa near Corning. A longtime conservation advocate, a longtime farmer for, to care for the land, to care for our communities, and care for our family, and that's been our goal all along.
And ag advocacy is kind of it's not new, but it's kind of in vogue. And I, after reading about you, I'd say you were an advocate before that was even cool. So talking about that, farming is a really demanding job on your time and your talents, and yet you've gotten involved in so many different organizations at the state, national level, even locally. Tell me about your path to that, how you came to become a spokesperson for agriculture and the causes you believe in.
Sure. So Austin Turner at Corning, Iowa has always been an advocate, and their family has been very much involved with community development and everything going on in Adams County plus statewide. And he was my mentor, way back in the 1980s, and encouraged me and Elaine, my wife, to help out in our communities and think more globally and think more locally than just our farm. And we've tried to follow that example, and it's just been part of it. And yes, it takes time away from the farm. Yes, it's all volunteer, but the return on that investment of our time and caring has been so terrific. The folks we've got to meet, the things we got to learn, and it has helped us on our farm. And we've always had a good team on the farm here to take over when I've needed to be away.
Yeah, and that's also extremely important. So, as you think about again, and I read in your bio so many different organizations you're a part of, and I'm sure that only scratched the surface. But are there things that stand out in your mind, the things that you had worked for and worked on that you're particularly proud of in the advocacy realm?
Well, one of the big things was the environmental programs at the Iowa Soybean Association. And at the time that we hired our environmental team, I was chairman of the soybean checkoff in Iowa, and were very much a privilege to be part of that team that hired those folks, that helped us look more at environmental programs and encouraging not only ourselves but all of agriculture in Iowa to think more about how they care for the land and how they clean the water and sequester nutrients and all the other good things that we should do.
Yep. I know you've traveled extensively representing agriculture here in Iowa. What do you talk to folks about on those trips about giving them a glimpse of Iowa agriculture.
Yeah. Well, our focus was on soybeans at the time, but really all of Iowa agriculture, because our best customers are pigs and chickens and cows and those kind of things. So we're advocating to market our products that we grow in Iowa around the world, and meeting with the ministers of agriculture and community development folks and economic development folks, no matter where they were in the world, whether it's in China or Southeast Asia or Europe or South America or Canada or wherever else it was. We were all advocating for all of agriculture because when we work together, we all benefit.
Yep, absolutely. So talking a bit more about your conservation initiatives and the things that you've done, I know you've been a leader here in implementing different environmental practices on your farm. When you talk to other growers, what are things that you would recommend they look at, or ways that farmers can lean into using some of those practices to improve their own operation?
Well, we've always been open to new practices and testing, and Chris can talk to you about testing, because we do a lot of that on this farm. But we'll test a new practice, whether it was no-till at the time, or cover crops, or new seed traits that Stein and others provide for us, new other technologies. We think it's really important for us to give those a good test and then implement them as they prove successful.
What are the things you're doing today, or the things that are on the horizon as far as conservation-wise that you're interested in learning more about, or maybe you're just starting to implement?
Yeah. Well, we've been 100% no-till since 1991, so more than 30 years. We've been growing cover crops starting in 2010. The last 5 or 6 years, we've been doing about 3,000 acres or 3,500 acres a year, which is about 2/3 of the land that we farm. Trying to get to 100%, but working toward that goal. But what we've learned is some of the new technologies that's out there, about biologicals, I think are something that we are looking at. We're always working with companies like Stein and Iowa State University and others to test new products, new technology, new seeds. I think the biologicals seem to be something that there's a lot of interest in, and they're really maybe proving to be something that's advantageous for us.
So when it comes to these environmental practices, I think sometimes it's hard to gauge what the return may be. Some of them are very long term, some are shorter term. I mean, how do you evaluate the success of some of those conservation practices you're looking at?
Yeah, well, we're seeing, our long-term no-till and our cover crops in particular, we're seeing that we are not losing any soil, that we're building organic matter in our soils, that we're building soil health. And in the end, our crops are more resilient. We're able to absorb more moisture in a shorter period of time to adapt to these severe raise events that we seem to have the last 10 years or so.
Do you talk to growers who might say, well, I tried no-till for a couple of years and it didn't work, or I tried cover crops and it didn't work? And how do you address that with someone like that?
Well, and Chris always says, did you really try it, or did you just take it for 1 year and see if it really worked or not? And you have to give it a fair test. We usually, before we go, very strongly on a new project or trait or whatever it is, we'll test it for 2 or 3 years, and then test it a little more for another 2 or 3 years before we go 100% or a high percentage toward that direction. So whether it's cover crops or new technologies or new biologicals or new seeds or whatever it is, we're always testing, and I think you have to be open-minded about it and give it a fair test. Don't just put it on something that you hope you don't have to change.
Work in progress sometimes.
Work in progress.
Yep. Switching gears a little bit, let's talk about your relationship to Stein. One of the things that is so neat is I know you've been a Stein customer for many, many years. We thank you for that. And more than that, you've been a seed grower for Stein for a number of years. In fact, we had a little trouble figuring out just exactly how long that's been. So I'm hoping you can clear it up for me today. Tell us a little about your relationship and how you got started with Stein Seed Company.
Well, we just started out trying some of the seeds with our local dealer, and then we became a sales dealer a few years later, back in the mid to late 1980s. Worked with Galen Schnack at Scheckinger Seed Company, and he encouraged us to try to grow some seed for Stein, and we did, and we do pay attention to details mainly because of all the testing we do. So we know what isolation means. We know what identity preservation is, and it's really important to us, and it's really important to Stein as our customer that we sell seed to, our production for the other farmers to grow, and having a product that is the right product, that is pure, that's not tainted, is important to all of us.
Yeah. So somewhere in the mid part of the 80s, probably, you started with Stein, and like you said, Galen Schnack, who still works with us today, is still an ISR for us, and Scheckinger is one of our production operations down there over in Harlan, Iowa. So awesome. Well, seed production is kind of unique in that it's a little different than commercial grain. Requires a few extra steps, but obviously it's something that you found fits your farm and your operation. I wonder, why has it been a fit for you and your operation?
Well, I think it's been a fit because we do pay attention to detail, that we do identify everything, but also it allows us to test the latest new seeds that are coming out from Stein. So that's a plus, and usually a couple of varieties per year are from South America that are winter production that are really brand new. So it lets us get a little ahead of the curve on yield and traits and those kind of things. So that's been important and an advantage to us, and having a premium for the seeds that we grow that is a really good thing for our bottom line too.
Yep, absolutely. So talking about seed traits, I think looking back, I think it's fair to say your operation, you guys have been early adopters on many of the different technologies that we put out, whether it was LibertyLink soybeans or Enlist E3 and so forth. Why have you been interested in trying some of those new technologies? I know sometimes there's tendencies to say, well, we'll see how people get along with it before we get on board, but it seems like you've been really eager to try those out. I wonder if you can elaborate on that.
Well, we've always been eager to try new things and test because we think that's a good business model for one thing. Because in general the new traits and the new technology and the new seeds are advantageous for whether it's for yield or weed resistance management or weed control or any of the other good things. Some of the other traits that our customers want even. So the latest one, for us, the last 5 or 6 years is the Enlist trait, and boy, that combination has really allowed us to take care of the resistant weeds that are out there, and not have a concern about vapor drift or anything else because it stays where we put it. We don't have to worry about our neighbors or our other crops of our own that are adjoining.
Good. So, Stein kind of hangs its hat on genetics, the ability to create newer, high-yielding genetics. Assume you've been with us for a long time. I think you I guess, would hope you would have seen that over the years. And I guess, is that something that you've seen in your own experience with Stein?
Yeah, it really has. The Stein does have yield, and I guess the example of that is how many other seed companies are actually growing the Stein genetics that are out there. I believe, at one time anyway, Stein genetics were about 70% of the Midwest market. So that says something about the testing program and the genetics program and the advancement program that Stein has.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned South America seed, and I wanted to touch on that because that's one of the other things. I talked to Galen Schnack, your ISR. He said, one thing I love about Gaesser Farms is they're not afraid to do South America seed. That's a little bit of a tricky situation because of timing, and I think you said earlier in the conversation, part of that is, that those seeds that are coming back South America are probably the newest, latest things, right? And is that kind of why you at least are willing to give that a look and try to grow those seeds?
Yeah, and we do give it a look, and sometimes, when they used to come on a boat, they were a little bit slow, and
Yep.
Once or twice we've said, we just can't wait any longer, and so can you find
Yep.
something else, but most of the time they came in time, and recently they do come in time for us to plant in a timely manner, and that's really important for us too.
Yeah, as a seed company, that's the challenge, is you've got that high performing genetics. It's the newest, latest stuff, but there's a few miles between here and there, isn't there?
Yeah,
So it takes time.
In many cases, it was, we would get to the port here in the United States, and then it'd be stuck there for a while because of trucking, or they just didn't want to unload or move it or whatever it was. So that's sometimes the frustrating part.
So then it's a trade issue.
Yeah, exactly.
So, like I said, you've had a great, long-standing relationship with Stein, going back to, again, Schechter Farms, and I guess would say, what would you tell customers, or obviously you've sold our seed to other growers. What do you tell growers about Stein Seed?
Well, I guess my tale to them is that Stein has yield, first of all, and Stein has traits that work for you, and the price is very competitive, and so those are the things that folks look at. But we also have backup, to help with, advising them on what traits might work for their farm.
Good. So, Ray, we talked about your involvement with Stein. You've been around Stein a long time, but in general, agriculture, especially production agriculture in our world, it becomes increasingly reliant on partnerships between growers and their suppliers. The traits and the technology and systems get so complex that I think farmers really rely on companies to help them wade through some of that. I guess, what are the things you look for in a company that you want to work with, whether it be seed or chem or fertility or equipment or any of those things? What are your expectations?
Well, one of our goals on our farm and with those we deal with is that trust, factor, and those relationships that you build over a long period of time. And we've seen the follow through both ways. We try to be very reliable, and Stein Seed Company has been very reliable for us to get the products that we needed at the right time, and to help with any advice that they might have too.
So talking about your operation here, I guess, what's next with Gaesser Farms? What are you guys looking at? And I know, we've got your son Chris here. You've got a great team here on the operation, and as things continue to evolve, you're just always looking ahead. So I'm curious, kind of what's on the horizon.
So for my part, my look ahead is that 2022 was my last full-time year of farming. We're still going to farm about 10% of our total operation, Elaine and I. But Chris and Shannon, our daughter-in-law, have been growing into our farm since 2009. Started out at 5% a year and growing till we were 50-50 partners for the last 4 years or so. And this was the year when I turned 70. This was the goal that the transition would happen a little more quickly then, and they've been are very ready to do this, whether it's financially or mentally or keeping all the records that need to be done and making those decisions. I'm confident in the future for them and our farm.
So are there any specific challenges that you think that farmers, including Chris, but farmers in general, are going to face over the next 10 years? What, looking ahead, I mean, you've seen a lot. I guess, what do you think is coming?
Well, when I was at the American Soybean Association, one of my focuses was on regulation, and some of the regulations, some of the things that come out of EPA in particular, to restrict some of the new traits or not have it accepted and approved of our new traits is a concern to me. The slowness, but also the slowness of accepting the new technologies with our foreign customers. At the Soybean Association, we've always said that we have to have all of our major customers approve a new trait before we want it to be grown widespread in the United States. So having those approvals is very important, and having a team at the Foreign Ag Service that understands that and understands the need, plus our ability to share our concerns and our needs with EPA and other USDA agencies. It's been so much a part of the advocacy of Iowa soybeans and American Soybean Association. We have to get those done because without that, it's hard to advance.
So those were a couple of challenges, and I think those are all very valid potential challenges that may exist out there. On the flip side of that, what opportunities do you think are coming over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, our population continues to grow, in the world, so we always have more mouths to feed. That's encouraging. But adapting the technologies and thinking, on our farm we're encouraging that thought in our neighborhood to think a little more circularly about what we do. So I just wanted to give you an example of our circular model on our farm, is that particularly in corn, our corn goes to the ethanol plant 14 miles away, creates environmentally fuel and less expensive fuel for everyone. But the DDGs, which is all the protein that's left over in the corn, feeds the animals in our area. And we work with our neighbors that have chickens and pigs to bring that manure back to our farm and feed our next crop. And that's our circular model. And the next step that we're working on, and Chris can talk about it, is we're also working with our neighbors who have cows and allowing them to graze some of our cover crops in the wintertime. It's good for them, it's good for our soil, and it helps everyone.
Yeah, that's a great local application that like you said, helps all the parties involved. So we've talked about your plans and your progression, and I think what's great is that as we talk about succession planning, that's something that I think is critical in agriculture and oftentimes not covered nearly enough. So my question would be, how do you chart that course? How do you start the conversation? How do you make a plan that everybody can buy into? Because it seems like that's a tripping point for so many operations.
Well, it is, and that plan is about building your team, And Chris is an agronomist from Iowa State, worked outside the farm for a year or so, was helping us part-time, and one fall day he comes into the house and said, Mom and Dad, I really would like to farm. And it was a happy day for us, and immediately we drew up a plan to allow Chris to grow into our farm at a pace that he could afford, and also a pace that we could afford that wouldn't cause us too many tax implications. So,
sure.
It's about planning, but it's about building your team, and you have to be willing to let go and let others take the responsibility, and that's not always easy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it also occurs to me that, ag is cyclical. It's an up and down kind of business. And the hard thing is you're talking about a long-term plan in a world where the returns will change and the situation will change. And so a lot of discipline in that. Saying this is the plan. We have to work the plan.
You do have to work the plan, and I've always shared that, out of 10 years, you're going to have 2 years that are really good, 2 years that are not very good at all, and 6 years that are just okay. And that's how you need to plan your business, to prepare for those bad years, but also take advantage of those good ones.
That's a pretty good description of production agriculture right there. So as you are beginning your part-time operation or phase of this operation, what's next on the horizon for you and your wife, Elaine?
Well, we both continue to volunteer a lot. Elaine volunteers 3 days a week at our local food pantry. So that's one of the things. And I just continue to volunteer for other things, solutions from the land. I do some things for the soybean associations, Leading Harvest is another organization I became involved with, all those kind of things. But I still love to do what we do, and I want to be here as much as I can. But and Chris knows this, that I'm not going to be quite as responsible as he would like sometimes. So they have to plan for that, and that's the difficult thing for them. It's easy for me because I can change my mind. But if they're counting on me, then it maybe that's not so good.
Well, and it occurs to me that what you're describing is also, communication, which is such an important part of any sort of succession planning or any farm operation, period. I mean, at the end of the day, so much of what you do it varies by the day, and good communication is probably the key to making all that happen, I suppose.
Usually a few days or a week in advance, we kind of go over what all of our plans are and what our needs are and try to work around those.
Plan A and Plan B and Plan C and on down the line, right?
Yeah. You can ask Chris about that.
Well, we've been visiting today with Ray Gaesser, Stein Seed Company customer. Thank you so much, Ray, for being a great spokesperson for the ag industry and being a loyal customer of Stein. We appreciate you coming on the show.
You're welcome, and Stein's been a great company to work with, and we talked about our next generations and how important they are, and our next generation is part of the Stein team here at the farm too.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to schedule a follow-up to come back and visit with Chris and see how we're progressing here.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, that's our time for today. I'd like to thank our guests and our listeners for joining us for another episode of the Stein Seedcast. We'll be back again soon with more expert interviews and insights about all things Stein. And to never miss an episode, subscribe to the Stein Seedcast wherever podcasts are found.